And whenever you see that stereotype, replace it. Right? Like that's an easy thing you can do. Start opening your networks. You know, not everything has to be at like a policy national level, but if there's that opportunity, go for it.
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Linet Mera, co-founder of the Unconscious Bias Project. And in this second part, Dr. Mera shares practical tools we can use to help address unconscious biases. And she is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede.
The opportunities at UCSF, I loved science. I still love science. So I was, you know, very similar to being the outcast in Colombia. When I got to UCSF, I was like, oh, there are no Latinx professors. There are like women, I can count them on one hand in this graduate program. Yeah. Women of color, there is one.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if this happened to you, but when I got to grad school, I did not know that there was a difference between white women and women of color. I did not know that. And I go into this women in science and engineering meetings, and they all talk about how women are underrepresented and they are looked down in the sciences. And I'm like, really? This happens? When I was totally unaware of it. And then we talk about, you know, I learn about the pay gap. I learn about how there are no enough opportunities for women in science and how all of these things that happen with women, right? And I was like, oh, good. I'm going to sit at the table. I read Lean In. I think I saw the TED Talk for Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg. And I'm like, oh, this is not going to happen. I'm going to sit at the table. And I sat at the table every single day. Every time we had group meeting, I would sit at the table. I think I was doing it before, but I just wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'll sit at the table. And so I'm like, I'm this empowered woman. And then I start working and I'm like, oh, there's a difference. Yeah, and I did not learn it until I started working in Linet. That's only like 4 years ago, you know? I thought that I was just another person moving around in the world. And it's like, I just have to work hard and take, you know, ask for opportunities and go for things. Yeah. And things will work out. And then I'm like, oh, wow, things are really, really not like I thought they were. Yeah. And that was a very, very, very big shock. Oh. And you know, I talk with my friends about this, some of my friends, and I don't think that a lot of them understand where I'm coming from, because it sometimes sounds like it's a victim mentality. It's like, oh, if I don't work hard, I think that's how they perceive it. And it's like, oh, all you have to do is work hard. And I don't know how to articulate it, but for me is having this realization and having this knowledge now, it helps me understand that it's not just about working hard. Yeah. That does not mean that I don't have to work hard. That does not mean that if I'm thrown in the pool, I'm not going to start swimming, you know, because the field is uneven. It just means that some people were thrown in the swimming pool with floaties to help them stay afloat, and some people were thrown in the pool with their hands tied. And so there is a difference. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to use my legs to keep myself afloat. It just means that just doing that is not going to make it equal. And I think that's the biggest understanding for me in the last 4 years in having these conversations and talking to people. And I did not learn that from white people. I learned that from my very few Black friends that also work with me in these fields. And when you don't have anybody else, you find the people that are othered because you find something in common. Yeah. With those people.
And I had, so similarly, but not similarly, I had the same experience. So when I went into graduate school, I really thought it was about science because that's what I had heard. It's all about science. how smart you are. Can you work on the right problem? Can you work hard enough to learn the latest technology, to read the most papers, to like, you know, find the most interesting question that will lead to an interesting answer, right? Like that's how academia is painted. And it's absolutely not a meritocracy. Like it just, you know, and it took me experiencing some of the worst sexism and racism in the most subtle ways, really the most subtle ways, that pounded into my head that this just was not the situation. I have very strong inner critics. I kept on thinking, I'm not working hard enough. I'm just not finding the right question. I'm too slow. I'm just not smart enough. I just, you know, I need to study harder. And the thing is, like, you and I are hard workers. Like, our peers are hard workers. The up and coming, you know, if you're a college student, you're listening to this, you are a hard worker. You are so smart already. You're brilliant. You're great. Yeah. The thing is that we have to prove ourselves 3 times over. Yeah. If we want to get the same opportunities. Yeah. And sometimes even if you do that, you're not going to get them because I worked, so initially I worked for a professor that was like on billboards all over the place. He was tapped by Obama to be on his science council. Like, this is a big shot guy who was really great with people. He's very good, like very charismatic person. And he championed this thing at UCSF called like the spokes of academia, and thinking about incoming graduate students as going through any of a variety of spokes in the fields, being like not just going into professor jobs in academics, but going into biotech, going into policy, going into science communication, going into all of these different areas. This same person, when I was like, you know what? I think biotech is kind of cool. I think I'm going to like explore that a little bit. He was like, are you giving up on me? I was like, what? Are you the same person? Yeah. This same person, I realized after I had to switch labs out of that lab, a really toxic experience there, he would never ask any of the women in his lab to go to conferences. Oh, wow. I asked him multiple times to go to conferences. He's like, well, your science just isn't ready yet. Wow. Every other guy in the lab was offered the opportunity to go to conferences. Women, the only woman that ever went to conference with him, she pestered him every day, and she was his favorite. She was the favorite, right? So, like, it's that kind of realization, not to say, like, yeah, it's not like you don't have to be a victim of, like, oh, poor me, this is the situation. Is like, okay, this is what it is, and knowing what the situation is empowers you to advocate for yourself. Yes. Yeah. The kind of person I am, I talk a lot, right? Like, so I meet people and I found other mentors and I advocated for myself to leave this very toxic lab. The guy was awful. And I went to another lab and I advocated for myself to be there. And this other professor was unfortunately also really awful. Oh, it happened like once they were getting close to tenure, all these anger management problems started coming out. Like, he was just emotionally abusive to everybody, yelling in the middle of lab, and it was like open floor settings. It was terrible. So throughout my graduate career, I'd been doing things to, like, I joined the Minority Graduate Student Organization. We developed the first diversity workshop for the entire graduate division. Yeah. Which has never happened before. Yeah. You know, I was on several, like, chancellor's advisory committees on the status of women. I was on the chancellor's committee for campus culture, climate, and inclusion. I did so many things. I co-ran Women in Life Sciences. I did so much stuff to try to help other people like me, because I thought, you know, I am here, I have these opportunities, and instead of feeling guilty about succeeding, I want to go and help other people have these opportunities that I have. I want to help them so they don't have to learn, you know, in the trenches. They can learn from my mistakes, right? This was my goal. And I was like, I'm going to be a researcher. I'm going to lead a professor job, and we're going to explore the most cool things. I'm going to lead the most inclusive group, and it's going to be really great. And I was hit with, like, 2 of probably, you know, the most stereotypically worst bosses that you could ever think of. And in advocating for myself and eventually graduating, I had to learn that, like, my values of, like, valuing other people, of collaboration, of actually wanting to engage in open science where I could talk to other people about my research and they would accept it, and they would, the purpose is to learn science. That wasn't a core value. Like the core value in academia is competitiveness.
Yeah.
Can you reach the first authorship first?
Yeah.
Can you get the grant before the other person? Like my first professor literally elbowed a woman in a picture op in front of a newspaper so that he would be front and center and she wasn't in frame.
Oh my gosh.
Like that guy is being internationally recognized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's what it takes to be in academia. And so to be honest, after I graduated, it took me a long time to recover, like mentally, emotionally. My brain, I was in deep depression and anxiety. I was having anxiety attacks. Mm-hmm. It was bad. Mm-hmm. And it took me a long time to recover. And when I finally started peaking out and started reconnecting with my friends, I realized no, I need to do something where we're dealing with people being good people to other people. Mm-hmm. And that's how I started the Unconscious Bias Project. That's how I ended up doing what I do now. Is I realized, I actually asked that same professor that was the reason why I went to UCSF, Dr. Carol Gross. Mm-hmm. She gave a talk about the status of women in science. And, it was a lot better than in the 70s, but it was still bad.
Yeah.
And so I asked her, I was like, wow, we have some inherent structural problems in academia. We have some problems in how we reward people for science. We have problems in how we're talking about people of color. We have problems in how we talk about women. Like, there's so many problems here. We need some sweeping change and we need it fast. Like, how would you do that? Like, tell me. Like, I was like, I'm ready to go up in arms and help you do it. And she said, and this is, she's super tenured, internationally recognized, forefront in her field. She's like, I don't have the clout to do that kind of work. So I think just small, incremental, gradual change. I was shocked, Jenny. I was like, no fucking way. I was like, no fucking way. I cannot believe that this super established woman that everybody, not a single faculty member would ever speak ill of her because she's that great and she's super collaborative and she's a great mentor. She didn't feel like she had the power to do that. And so when I realized that, I was like, okay, I just can't work within academia. It'll take me 3 lifetimes to start making the change that I needed as a graduate student. Yeah. So that's how we founded the Unconscious Bias Project. Is we were both in academia, we were both seeing the problems there, and we're like, okay, the way that we've been doing like sexual harassment training, for example, is all about feeling guilty, all about like, you're a terrible person, you can't speak to anybody this way, you can't talk about their shoes, you can't talk about their hair, you can't go and invite anybody out for coffee, like everybody's a terrible human being and you're just gonna like make people feel terrible was kind of like the outcome. And then you all should feel ashamed. And it's like, this is the worst way to get anybody to change behavior. Absolutely. And because we were scientists, we researched what was out there, and we researched like what motivates people. It's like things that energize them, things that empower them, things that make them have hope, things that, help them, that are practical, that they can do every day, that they can remember, things to change social norms, things to, adjust their whole environment, tools to advocate for themselves, tools to help others advocate for them. Right? Because the Linet model is all about, okay, it's on you to go and fix everything. And it's because you're so soft-spoken and you're such a woman. Sorry, Sheryl Sandberg, but it's true. Because you're such a woman, you have to become more like a man in order for you to be recognized. Yeah. And the truth is, if you're assertive, then you're aggressive. Yeah. If you go for leadership positions, then you're a bitch. If you advocate for pay, then, you're asking for too much. And it's just like, how about we look at the system underneath? How about we look at, why do we hide salaries from everybody? How about we look at, why do we have to go through our old boys network to give people jobs? How about we look at, let's take a look at our board of directors. How many of them are white men? Can we switch some seats out? Can we make more seats for those diverse voices? Can we make more seats? are people with disabilities actually getting hired for the technical jobs that they're qualified to do? These are the things that we saw in researching and developing our workshops and developing our approach, is like, let's empower people. So we made our motto 0% guilt trip, 100% empowerment, because we wanted people to feel excited, to feel like they had ownership. Whether you're like a Muslim mother in a wheelchair, or you're some like, white cis het, Christian guy, everybody has a role, right? And we can all do something.
Yeah.
As long as we do something, right? Like if you don't do something, if you stay quiet, nothing's going to change, right? If you leave it all on the woman of color to go fix, it's not going to change.
This journey for me has been like very, very recent, and I'm still going through it, right? But so I told you I read Linet, and I was like, yes, I'm empowered and I'm going to do all those things. And then I learned that even if I do all those things, it's not going to happen. And so really how I learned about, or how I started thinking about that book in a different way, is because I would share with some of the friends that I met at work that was very much aligned with the way that I thought. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, lean in. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, I mean, lean in. What about that? And I was like, why aren't you excited about lean in? And they're like, oh, because she's abrasive.
Yeah.
And because it's not aligned with reality. And I'm like, wait, what? Okay, break it down for me, because I don't understand. And these are the things that I just didn't understand. And I'm still trying to understand, and how, like we were talking about the individual, right? Like how everything can be fixed by the individual. And I think I very much believed that for a long time, until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where I'm starting to see examples of how that is just not true. And like I interviewed for a job, and of the 5 people I interviewed with, only one was a woman in the chemical field. When I talked to the other people, this is after I joined the company. By the way, I did not join that company because of their efforts in D&I, but I just needed a job. But I hear then the people talking about her, and they're like, oh, yeah, she's intimidating. And I'm like, And then I hear, yeah, I mean, she's very bossy. And I'm like, So now, like, I hear all of these things, and I understand how I met with her, and I did not find her intimidating. I found her assertive.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, man. I mean, if you are openly using this language, we have so much work to do, right? Like, this is a new person. This is a woman you're talking to, and you don't even realize what you're saying. There is so much work to do, right? And all of that is linking into our biases, right? So the work that you do right now with the Unconscious Bias Project is very much linked into trying to create awareness of unconscious biases. Can we talk about what they are, and maybe how we see them affecting people in their daily lives?
Yeah, of course. So I think what's really important is to start off with a definition, because even though talking about unconscious bias is like a buzzword now, like much like people talking about being anti-racist is like a buzzword. And it used to be that talking about being woke was one thing, and now it's like a bad thing. And, there's just like this field, because it's about people, it's always evolving, right? So I didn't want to, I'm literally pulling up my slides to give you the like official definition that we use in our workshops. And that's, we define bias as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. And when we talk about unconscious or implicit bias, it's bias that you have even though you're not agreeing with it, or even if you don't know it's there. So what does that mean? That means that, for example, my professor who was tapped by President Obama to be on his science council, this is the guy that's like, we want, equality for women. Right? That was his line. Like, he literally has his face on top of that line everywhere. This is the same person that wouldn't invite women to go to conferences. So he, on the one hand, is like, I am 100% feminist. I support women in science. I have women in my lab who are scientists. Never even looked at his track record. There are almost no women that went through his lab that are now in professor positions. So that he has unconscious bias against women, right? So you say one thing, and if somebody asks you, like, are you a misogynist? You'd say, no, absolutely not, right? And so those are biases that we have. And, I picked him as an example because it's really easy, but you can be biased against your own in-group. So, for example, one of the things that I learned is that even women are more likely to write recommendation letters for women that cite, they're good teachers, they're really great people, as opposed to talking about their scientific skills, for example. So we can be biased against our own in-group. And where do these biases come from? They're really, the way we think about them is that they're coming from stereotypes that are in our world. So what does that mean? That means that could be people that you're talking to, that could be something you see on the TV. Like, quick, think of a scientist right now. Albert Einstein, right? That was the first one you thought. Yeah. Old white guy, right? Like, because that's where you see everywhere, right? In kids' shows, who's the scientist? In movies, who's the scientist? In books, who's the scientist? In fiction books, who's the scientist? If someone is like, okay, who is the foremost person in your field? Like, who's the biggest, more impactful paper that you've read in your field recently? Who's going to be cited more? White guys. Right? Yeah. Because it's in our books, it's in our textbooks, it's on the internet, it's on Twitter, it's everywhere. So when we're dealing with this mountain of stereotypes and ideas about who belongs and who doesn't belong in a field, like, you actually have to work kind of hard to notice. So first step is noticing. Like, notice these associations, notice these stereotypes. Even if you think they're really obvious, notice them. Okay, this is a stereotype. Okay. And then what you want to do is counter that. So whether that's opening up a space for somebody that's different from you, whether it's getting to know, say, a disabled chemist in your field. So, for example, one of the techniques that we use in our workshops is stereotype replacement. So as soon as you see another image, for example, another TV show with a stereotype of an aggressive, loud black man, because that's everywhere, or in the news, right? Then immediately think of President Obama. So think of somebody that's counter-stereotypical to that stereotype, and that's enough to start reducing your bias. The scientists who study this call it the Obama effect. So all you need to do is, like, okay, the next time I see another Albert Einstein, I'm going to think of Marie Curie. I'm going to think of, like, whatever, like, pick your favorite scientist, remember them, remember their characteristics, who they are. And whenever you see that stereotype, replace it, right? Like, that's an easy thing you can do. Start opening your networks. Not everything has to be at, like, a policy national level, but if there's that opportunity, go for it. If there's a vote coming up about, women's rights, if there's a vote coming up about changing how, for example, your university or your work is doing its hiring practices, be vocal, be out there. And if nobody's talking about it, ask about it. One of the other things that we teach folks is to recruit bias buddies. And so we use the term bias buddies. What it means is active allyship. So find people that have different identities than you, that are on the same page with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have them be in the room with you and advocate with you when you're asking for, like, transparent pay, for example. So it's not just Jenny that's coming. Oh, it's, that Latina woman. That's just, whatever. She's always talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? But maybe it's also Bob, right, that's bringing this up. Maybe it's also, I don't know, Rachna, right? Like, maybe it's somebody else. And so, okay, these are all these different people. Maybe they have different levels in the organization than you. Maybe you're the only, like, manager in that position that's advocating for this, but maybe an employee is also advocating for this. Maybe a C-level person is also advocating for this. And it's like, okay, it's a bigger thing, right?
Yeah, but Linet, how do we ask for things? Because, it takes courage. For me, I I'm pretty shameless, so I will speak my mind. I've learned that that is not always in my best interest, but I will still, I've done it and I will continue doing it. I am just a little more aware of the consequences now because there are consequences. But for me to recruit other people and to convince them to come and be allies in this effort, I don't know how to do that. And I think that is a hard thing to do, especially for maybe, say, a white male that doesn't really see anything wrong with the system or doesn't really experience it. Maybe they see it, but maybe they don't experience it. And talking about it could have an impact on their daily lives. So the question is, how do we convince people to put their skin in the game?
That is exactly on the dot. When we're asking for active allies, when we're asking for bias buddies, we're asking people to take a risk. We're asking people to use their power, use their privilege, even if they don't know it or they didn't actively decide to have privilege, right? You have privilege by being a man. You have privilege by being cisgender. You have privilege by being straight. Right? You have privilege by coming from a two-parent household. You have privilege by coming from parents who went to college. Like, even if you worked your ass off to get to the position you have, Bob or Chris or Robert, you have that privilege and you have it. And it's not like, okay, now you should feel guilty and hate yourself for having that. It's like you should see this as an opportunity of like, you can make change, and guess what? You're much less likely to get penalized for it than Jenny will. And so it's hard. It's hard to find allies. And I'm going to plug what we do, but in our workshops,
I think it's important to have tools, right? Because that is what we need. And we can have intentions, but if we don't have the tools, then we're not going to be that effective.
Exactly. So in our workshops, when we actually have people practice intervention techniques, we have people practice, thinking about and writing out and saying how they would intervene in a moment of bias, for example. And so in our workshops, when we talk to people about bias buddies, we say, okay, look around the room. All of these people right here, they can be your bias buddies. You've all been to the same training. You all know why this is important. So all of you can talk about it to each other. So sometimes all you need is just like one person to start talking about it. And it doesn't have to, like, say your company didn't put out a statement on Black Lives Matter. Say your company didn't put out a statement on Stop AAPI Hate, or, doesn't, support, I don't know, women in science and engineering, for example. They don't support WISE. But they talk about being inclusive on their hiring practices. All it takes is one person to be like, hey, this thing is in the news. And, I know that we really care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, why don't we invite a speaker to come talk about it? Like, I think it would be cool to learn. So I'll start small, definitely. Like, if you're in that kind of organization and you're like, okay, we want equal pay, we want transparent salaries, we want no negotiation for bonuses. We want to make sure that we're donating into the community. Like, they're not going to be ready for that. And they're going to see like you bringing those things as an attack. Some people see it like that. Some people see it as an attack on, oh, you're doing it wrong, or you're terrible, you're racist because you haven't been doing this. That's not necessarily true. It's a struggle of like hundreds of thousands of companies across the state. I mean, millions of companies across the world, trillions. I don't even know how many companies there are in the world that have struggle of like, okay, we're chemists, we manufacture beer. Why is this an issue for us? Like, we're not like, I don't know, teaching, inner city kids how to, do tech. Why would this affect us? And so I think the first part is to just like open it up as a conversation. And once it starts being like something that people are talking about, then talk about like, hey, competitor so-and-so just started this series, or competitor so-and-so did an analysis of their diversity and they put it out on their website. Like, what does our company think about that? Like, that's interesting. And then as you start having these conversations, then you can start seeing, Bob is actually the one that's always like, yeah, this is great. or yeah, Black Lives Matter, or, or they're the one that was like, everybody, let's read Dr. Kendi's anti-racism book. Like, that was the guy that keeps on bringing this up, or maybe they talk to you afterwards, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's out in public, right? It could just be somebody that talks to you later. That could be your bias buddy. And be like, hey, I think you're really great at doing this, and I think we have some similar values. Share your values, connect with them. See, like, hey, you have a kid, I have a kid. You went to Texas A&M, I went to Texas A&M. Oh, we have this shared commonality. And also, I see how much you speak up for these issues that matter to me. What do you think our company does really well when it comes to this stuff? And then where do you think we should grow? What's a good thing to grow? And then you think, I was thinking that it would be really great if we started, I don't know, having diversity workshops, if we started changing how we hire, if we started changing how we onboard, if we started changing how we do exit interviews. You just start somewhere. And then you slowly, you start gaining ground of like, okay, let's put this together. Bob, do you know somebody in HR that could help us with this? Do you know somebody, in like, I don't know, maybe they're the C-level person that can help with this. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there's nobody at the company that does that. Okay, let's invite a speaker from that company that does the things that we want to have in our company. Let's have them come and give a talk about their research or their, latest patent or something, or the biggest thing, the innovation that they have. And then we'll also ask them to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you know what I mean? Like, it can be part of the work. So, for example, people that are in academia, we give them some data, right? Because scientists sometimes respond to data.
Hopefully. That'd be nice.
Yeah. And there's a lot of data about innovation and diverse workforces. And so they can talk about that. So, for example, so you'd bring up, so there's several things to bring up. One is to bring up like core values, right? Okay, our core value in our organization is innovation. Well, the more innovative companies are diverse. So how can we make sure that we're more diverse so we're more innovative? If it's like, if the core values of the C-level folk are money, like, okay, well, when we have toxic cultures that actually cost us $16 trillion. Okay, so the U.S. economy has lost about $16 trillion over the past 20 years due to race-based inequality, according to Citigroup's study. $16 trillion. So you're leaving money in the trash by not being inclusive. You are losing money. Basically, if you think you're being successful, you could be so much more successful if you were equitable. And that's just anti-Black racism. What if we were looking at anti-Latinx? What if we were looking at anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-people with disabilities? Once we start looking at that, it's a lot, right? So all you have to do is find your shared values and then connect it.
And it's an interesting way to look at it as well when you talk about the $16 trillion that they are costing, because it's not an opportunity. It's not something nice that you would have. It's actually something that you are living, that you are experiencing. Like if a business in your organization was costing you $13 trillion or even just a fraction of that, you would be restructuring that business.
Yeah.
You would be doing something about it.
Emergency. We're losing money.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's a very, very interesting point. Rather than saying, oh, we could make more money if we were more inclusive. Yes, that is true. Yeah. That is true. But the fear of all the money that you're costing your organization is going to, unfortunately, make you to act a little faster.
Yeah. Jenny, you actually had said something earlier in the podcast that I forgot to highlight in that moment. But I think you said, like, I was interviewing for jobs and I didn't choose to go with that company because they weren't doing as much D&I stuff as the other company that I ended up joining. Right there. That is a reason for companies to do that work, because they're losing out on talent if they don't have these things. Right? They're losing out on skilled people, smart people that work super hard, right? Like, by not having these things in place. Like, that is a highlight right there.
Yeah.
Like, that's how, when I was looking for jobs, that's what I looked for. Like, What do they say on Glassdoor? Do they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program? Do they have anybody hired for that position specifically, right? Or is it just like, okay, they have one Black Lives Matter statement and that's it?
Yeah. And so we talked about at the organization level, maybe what we can do to start the conversation going or things like that. But I've also been in situations that some of them are personal, but some of them are professional situations. I have a very vivid example in my mind where I was at a table having dinner with the CEO of the company, my boss, and my colleagues, and other people in the field as well. And this person, one person who, by the way, has a women-owned business, his wife is the head of the business so that they can enjoy the credits of having a woman-owned business. I started talking about another scientist, and I said the name, and I said, oh, you know, the scientist actually went to Texas A&M. She worked in one of the companies in College Station, and that was his cue to talk about her. And he goes, wow, that person, she's very aggressive. And I was like, okay, why do you say that? And he's like, oh, I was in this event that was about women in 3D printing. And they were talking about how women get discriminated and how women are just not taken seriously. And she was just, very angry and she was very aggressive. And I was like, oh, okay. And he happened to mention another person that was on the table, like having dinner with us. And like, right. For the sake of the conversation, we'll say Bob. He's like, right, Bob, you were there. What do you think? And Bob was like just smashing the food in his mouth. And he's like, I am not going to engage. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, yeah, Bob, what do you think about it? And he's like, no, nothing. I don't remember. And so I was very angry.
Yeah.
I was very infuriated because I understood what was happening, right? So at that moment, I had to gather every single composure that I had and gather my feelings and try to respond in the most professional way that I could. And I said, actually, research from Google has found that women do get treated different when they go into interviews. And there's some body of research out there that says that we make decisions about hiring somebody as soon as they enter the room. And then we ask questions that validate our decision so that we look for evidence after we have made that decision. And so when these women are talking about these, that's what they mean. And usually it is related to unconscious biases because we all have them. So I responded because part of having a seat at the table is for me to say something about it when things happen, because then what's the point of having some progress, right? But I was very torn apart at trying to respond in a professional way versus just letting him have everything that I had to say about it. So do you have any suggestions or tools for how we can engage in these conversations that can be very difficult? And if we approach them with maybe facts and empathy, it could be more productive.
So first off, I am so sorry that happened to you. I could feel my own anger rising as I was hearing about this conversation that I'm not even in. So, and I think for the folks listening in, it's just like, sometimes you don't know what somebody has to deal with every day, right? And so getting another aggression or microaggression, I mean, people call it microaggression when it's not like overt, but it's just as harmful. It's a form of violence. And so receiving that is never easy. And, even though I do this as my work, I don't expect everybody to intervene every time. Yes, having a seat at the table does give you some power, does give you the opportunity. Like if you can speak up, that's great. But fortunately, there's lots of different things you can do. So first off, great on, being able to sense that you were getting angry and trying to find an ally in the moment, which you tried and they weren't there for you. Great on, having the wherewithal to pull a fact like research, like that goes to show what great scientists you are. La doctora here, finding research in the moment as misogyny is happening. I don't feel bad about the way you responded. Like whatever you do, don't feel bad because you did respond, right? And that actually intervening in a moment like that, even if the outcome isn't what you hope, is a lot more than saying nothing. It would weigh on your psyche more. That research out there shows that. However, it is always important to take care of yourself. So if somebody else is in the situation, but they had like a horrible day, I don't know, their dad died or, whatever, like maybe that's not the time to engage and they shouldn't feel bad for not engaging because you have to know your bandwidth, right? Like we're under constant trauma and stress. And if you're being, stereotyped often, aggressed against often, you have less bandwidth, right? It'll make sense that you are more angry. You might not have the capability in that moment to find a fact or a research paper to cite. That's okay, right? And so barring that, if you are ready to engage, again, so bias buddy. So I don't know who else was in that table, but if there was somebody else in your company, for example, our fictitious person, Bob or Sam or Samantha or whatever, that has been on these, at these, big honcho level lunches or whatever, tell them this happens to me all the time. And I hate when people do that. I would be awesome if you could second me or you could, back me up if I intervene in those moments, or I can give you a signal. Like when I rub my nose like this, that's when I want you to hop in and then I'll second you, right? I'll uphold whatever you said because it's important that we interrupt that in the moment. So you interrupted that in the moment. Maybe you didn't get that person to retract, but everybody else that was within earshot got what you said. So you already made an impact. Right? Maybe that person isn't going to change, but the other people around you that heard what you said, they were impacted by that. So you already lessened the blow of that aggression. Okay. So, assuming that you're alone and there's nobody else there that you can lean on or whatever, and you're having this conversation and there's other, C-level people there, you can always talk to that person after the fact. Maybe it's like that setting was too intense. Like, I think what you said was wrong, or that sounded misogynistic and I know you're not a misogynist. Something like that. You're like, wow, that sounded like a total stereotype about women in leadership and I know you're not a misogynist. So I think probably she was really upset by talking about the things that she encounters every day, don't you think? I don't think you actually mean that she's aggressive. I think you mean that she was really upset in the moment. And studies show that, women that are assertive or, speak with any sort of volume are perceived as aggressive, but they're actually not. It's just that there's double standards, right? And, so then you can give them like an out in that moment. Or I think what you meant to say was, she was really upset and you were put off by that. You can like fix it for them in some ways. So one of the other tools is observing the problem. Like, oh, that sounded misogynistic. I'm sure you didn't mean to be misogynistic. Or, ooh, ouch. Last time I met with them, they were really friendly and blah, blah, or, other people that I've talked to sound like they were really great. Why would you think that? And then he gives his example. Oh, she was really upset. Blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah. So why would you think that she's always like that? Wouldn't you be upset if, like, I don't know, people named whatever that person's, let's say their name was Randall. People that were named Randall are always told to get coffee for everybody. Wouldn't you be upset? Like, that would suck. So, like, that would make sense. Another way that you could redirect it is like, oh, that's interesting. So if you think that she's bossy, then you think, and you could name another important person in the field that maybe is really loud and be like, so do you think that that other person is bossy and aggressive? Because they're also really loud. And the last time I went to see them give a talk, they were like yelling at everybody. And or like I just said, you label the stereotype. used a great tool, which is transferring the work. Why would you say that? Right. Like sort of like, and then you could continue asking, well, why would you say that? I mean, I don't care what Bob thinks. Bob's obviously busy with his brisket.
Yeah.
Why would you say that though? Like, oh, she was really upset. Like, yeah. So did you interact with her outside of that? Like, why would you say that she's aggressive? You know, like she's obviously talking about something she's really passionate about. Like when you're talking about, I don't know, name a sport.
Yeah.
Don't you get really loud?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like sort of like continue questioning until they have to do the work of finding out that their connection was what's wrong.
Yeah. Those are really powerful tools, I think. I hope that I can find sometimes the emotional intelligence to use them. You know, sometimes I get really, really angry. And so it's really hard for me to think rationally. In that scenario, I had a lot of things that, you know, there were a lot of potential repercussions. So I did have to check myself. But that's not how I usually react. I usually am a lot more emotional than that.
Yeah.
And so I would display a lot more anger and less empathy. I think that's usually how I naturally react to these situations.
Of course. That's absolutely valid. You are right to get angry. Like I would not say don't get angry. That makes sense that you were angry. Anybody would be angry. That's a terrible situation. I think when I talk about these different tools, like I'm practicing those. So, you know, practice what you want your response to be next time. So knowing that you got into this situation, like maybe that's something that you encounter a lot in your field. Practice some responses. What are the things that you're going to pull out of your hat? Maybe it's that research study. Maybe it's observing the problem. Maybe it's labeling the stereotype. Maybe it's talking about, you know, a male figure in the field and how they're really angry all the time, but nobody calls them aggressive. You know, maybe but you have to practice it. So you write it out, you say it out loud. And then other things like, so from a facilitator's perspective, the things that we use when we're going into workshops and things like that is we practice like emotional regulation. So there's one thing I learned recently called 5-finger breathing. So you take your hand, wherever it is, it could be underneath the table, and you just breathe in. And you trace your fingers with the other finger. You trace your fingers on one hand with the other finger, and you breathe in, and you breathe out. And you breathe in and out. And so on for all of the fingers, and then trace it all the way back, right? And then like feel yourself in your seat, and like, okay, all right, I'm feeling anger. Okay, anger will pass. Right? Like I am safe, right? Like I am not under physical duress. And this is a moment that's really important for me to respond. How would I like to respond? It could be that they've moved on in the conversation by the time that you get you get calm, and you can say, hey, you know, there's something that's just stuck in my mind. And, you know, you were talking about the scientist and you said that she was aggressive, and I just got stuck there. I mean, I know you were talking about these other really cool things, and I really want to hear about X or Y, but you said this and it just sounded off to me. Don't you think so? Like, why would you say that about her? Do you see? Like, it's a little different. If you give yourself a little space, give yourself a little time, you could do that, or you could practice how you want to intervene. Again, if you can have that other person in the room with you, you know, that helps too.
Yeah.
But practice it. That's really like, I know the onus becomes on you, right? But if you can practice it, then it's going to be more ready for you. If you know, sort of envision it and how you would act, it's more ready for you. If you practice like your 5-fingered breathing at other less tense moments, it's going to be accessible to you, and your body's going to remember that's what you want to do when you're upset.
Yeah. This is a constant learning, right? I don't think that there is, it's good to be aware. And then once you are aware, you need the tools to start trying to make progress. Because like you said, with this, even if this doctor that was very well recognized in her field didn't feel like she could have any weight, then it's almost disheartening. But it doesn't mean that we can do the work in our own spheres, in our own circles, right? So, Lynette, there's two things I want to ask you before we close. One is how can we hear about or learn more about the Unconscious Bias Project and the work that you do in your organization? And then I have a fun question to ask you at the end.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny, again, for reaching out to me and for doing this podcast and being such a resource for the community. It's so powerful. I'm just really grateful for that. If you want to learn more about what I do, you can go to ubproject.org. That's U as in unicorn, B as in beautiful, project.org. That's our website. You can also follow us on Twitter at UBP_STEM. We're also on Facebook, on Instagram. What else are we? Oh, and we also have a LinkedIn page, so Unconscious Bias Project. Or you can come find me. Definitely link up with me. I'm always up for networking with folks. You can find me on LinkedIn, Linet Mera, Linet Mera. And look us up. If your organization, your company is interested in doing a climate survey to really get into what's working and what's not working at the organization, if you want to come have us give a talk, we give talks and keynotes. We do in-depth workshops for leadership for all staff. And we do custom programs for folks. So if you need consultation on writing a diversity, equity, inclusion statement, or you want to get started on creating a DEI strategy at your organization, we are the folks for that. We are a nonprofit, meaning that we are centering the mission. We're centering the impact first. And we do have sliding scales prices. So go ahead and hit us up, ubproject.org, or you can email us, ubp@ubproject.org.
Thank you for that information. And then the last thing it would be, say a person or a friend of you goes to visit your city for the first time and you're not there, unfortunately. Where would you tell them to go? What are some places or things that you would recommend them to do since you can't be there?
Okay, so if you're in Las Cruces and I'm not there, I super recommend going to White Sands. It's just like a 45-minute drive away. It's this gorgeous park, and it's filled with literally like the finest white sand ever. You feel like you're on a Caribbean beach. It's so amazing and surreal. Gorgeous pictures. You can do a night hike there, which is so beautiful. If you are in Berkeley, Oakland, Bay Area, I would really suggest going up for hikes in Point Reyes. It's one of like the hidden gems of the Bay Area. There's lots of amazing wildlife out there. And if you have a kid and it's not super pandemic scary, Cal Academy is like an amazing place to go. And if you're in Bogota and I'm not there, I recommend you hike up Monserrate. You get this great view of the city from up there. But yeah, enjoy the nature, enjoy the people. That's what I would recommend.
Absolutely. And understand that your air might be lacking once you get on top of Montserrat.
Oh, yeah. Of course, it's super high elevation. Definitely don't do it the day you arrive. Give yourself a couple of days to adjust to the high elevation in Bogota.
Thank you so much, Lynette. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Jenny. I appreciate all you do, and thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinxScan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxscan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más. Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinxScan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxscan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.